Hey all. So catching up on our spotlight videos, today we are talking about Onslaught, the newest member of the mutant class, and a very powerful one at that. First thing to talk about is that this is our new Prestige King, shattering the old record held by infamous Iron Man. I believe this number here in the video is actually incorrect. Not sure why the spotlight that I took these pictures from had the old number, but it's actually 18710. Anyway, incredibly high prestige. Good for those of you chasing things. Moving on to the attributes. Survivability at 2.5 is maybe fair, maybe a little on the low side, because there are multiple damage resistances in this character, which sometimes turns into healing. It's kind of an interesting one. They have solid block proficiency. We'll kind of see how that plays out. But no inherent healing, right? And no like massive damage mitigations within the kit. So I get where this is coming from. Damage at 3.5, again, feels like maybe a little low. You don't have to work for it, but the damage output on this guy when things are going correctly is absolutely insane. Not like Kushala or Cosmic Ghost Rider levels, not at those pinnacles, but very high. Ease of use too, this is really going to be what it comes down to, right? Because in the fights where Onslaught is an easy pick, I would say he's easier to use than this. It's kind of like Absorbing Man in that. In the fights where he is not an automatic pick, he can still be very, very good, but you have to work for it a little more. And then maybe 2 out of 5 ease of use matter or is a bit more accurate. I would say this is probably a fair assessment. There's just a big asterisk here for if you are facing someone or a node that purifies, then this number definitely goes up. Utility 4, definitely fair. Tons of utility in this kit, and most of it is pretty automatic. And then Defender Strength 5. This is a roadblock defender that intentionally turns a lot of things off. So, moving on to strengths and weaknesses. Strengths doesn't take damage from a lot of different damage over time effects and has more than 100% resistance to them, so even on nodes like Enhanced Bleeds in War, will still be able to survive, where some other characters with 100% resistance would die very quickly. And like we said earlier, that means willpower, that means healing. Next up, nobody is currently immune to Neuroshock, so his damage is extremely reliable. When it's not Neuroshock, it's Degen, which nobody is immune to and only a couple have resistance to, so very powerful there. And then Daunted. Daunted increases all damage the opponent takes during either character's special attacks, including effects not from their kits. This applies to Power Stings. This applies to Degen from Brute Force or Linked nodes. This applies to even the Degen from something like Life Transfer. This is a very powerful ability. Watch for it all over the place. And then non-contact First Light and First Medium. This makes him scarier as a defender. Also, pretty powerful attacker utility and makes it so that he usually cannot be parried if you are late to a punish or something. Moving on to weaknesses, although he does get access to Degen, a lot of his damage is energy, so high energy resistance can slow him down, at least until you turn on the Degen. Reverse Control's immunity is good for an attacker into Onslaught, because that makes it significantly easier to push to his Special 2, which is a lot less scary than the Special 1 if you do have a way to deal with Reverse Controls. And then if people don't crit against him, well, that's very helpful as well. Pretty much all of these weaknesses are looking at an attacker going into a defending Onslaught. I would say for an attacking Onslaught, it's a little bit harder to come up with some clear weaknesses. If you are facing somebody who does not purify debuffs, especially stun debuffs, if you are facing somebody who is stun immune rather than debuff immune, and if there is some difficulty to countering their heavy attack, then things are probably going to fall apart pretty quickly. There is a loop here. It's a pretty robust, well-guarded loop, But in certain situations, that loop will fall apart, and then Onslaught's going to be a pretty underwhelming attacker. So you got to watch for that. Moving on to abilities. We already talked about this, but the first light and first medium attacks do not make contact with the opponent. Incoming bleed, shock, and incinerate effects get minus 150% potency. This does not mean that you heal from them on their own. A damaging effect can only be reduced to 0 potency. There's no such thing as negative potency in our game. But like I said earlier, if something would cause one of these effects to be stronger, this stops it, right? Or this is an extra hedge against it. So if Onslaught is facing a node with 60% enhanced shocks, then that will go from 100 to 160, then reduced by 150, and only 10% of the original potency will be getting through, making it much easier for Onslaught to completely overwhelm those effects with willpower. Do gotta watch for Despair, but an extremely powerful ability there. Onslaught's debuffs have 50% increased ability accuracy against skill champions. This means you don't have to worry about landing them against Mantis, who against mutants never gets better than 50% potency on her Tranquilize. It's important to note this is not restricted to personal debuffs, so this affects Onslaught as a defender on nodes, even against stronger Tranquilizes like Kate Bishop or Shield. You're going to have to watch out for that. And it also applies to Onslaught stuns. So if you are facing a skill champion who's reducing your ability accuracy when hitting into your block via Disorient or something like that, Onslaught is still going to have a very good chance to land that stun off the parry. And then if a personal debuff or the stun from the parry mastery is purified or prevented due to debuff immunity, that debuff instead becomes a passive. So this is extremely powerful. It means that if you are facing a debuff immune opponent, including the right back at it node in Alliance War, which is a very dangerous one, Onslaught can just passive stun all the time. Basically has the Magneto House of X pre-fight for whenever somebody would get rid of that stun. Now, it is very important to note that this, unlike some other abilities, when it just says Purify, it means it. Onslaught does not get this passive when facing an opponent with Cleanse. That was an intentional design decision because he does get bonuses against Purify, against debuff immunity, and against ability accuracy reduction, right? And so Cleanse was intentionally left open as a way to stop his stuns. That is inconsistent with some older characters like Storm or Bishop, but the plan is and has been for a while to clean up their wording and specify that they also do that when their debuffs are cleansed. So just to address that disconnect there. Moving on to the next section, whenever the opponent's combo meter passes a multiple of 10, which will be more dangerous against skill characters that gain extra combo, Onslaught gains a non-stacking crush charge, and then when starting an attack, while he has that charge, he consumes it and inflicts a crush debuff for 3 seconds. So this will follow all the other rules of having extra ability accuracy against skill champions and of applying as a passive if it is purified or prevented. And at the moment, no one is immune to crush. It is also important to note that while there are some inconsistencies at the moment with the whole unblockable ecosystem, crush is not technically unblockable. It says incoming attacks cannot be blocked. And so it does get through people who have the ability to block unblockable. There are a fair number of characters and nodes right now where block unblockable is not properly cleaned up and can block crush, but that is going to be changed. This is a very powerful ability, so keep your eye on that. Moving on to Daunted. This is a new effect on Onslaught. When either champion well-timed blocks, inflict an indefinite Daunted debuff of 15% potency. And like we said, what Daunted does is it increases damage taken by the opponent by the listed potency during either character's special attacks. So for the entirety of the special animation, any damage done to an opponent with Daunted on them is increased by this amount, and that can get up to 150%. That is big game, right? That applies to damage over time effects. That applies to the actual hits. It applies to the poison from Liquid Courage if you're facing somebody running the recoil tree. This can be a major source of damage. Additionally, while Daunted is active, Onslaught turns off his opponent's willpower mastery. So even more damage because you're not mitigating it with willpower. Neuroshocks is not a new ability with Onslaught, but it's a very rare one. Only Danny Moonstar had it before this. Both champions' attacks have a 15% chance to inflict a Neuroshock passive on Onslaught's opponent. For 12 seconds, critical hits and unblockable special hits, look out Nimrod, have their chance increased by 40% flat, or double that against skill champions, meaning that these hits from skill champions are now up to a 95% chance, 80 plus 15, to inflict that Neuroshock. So they are going to stack very, very quickly. I highly recommend not fighting Onslaught with a skill champion, if at all possible, and even better, don't land crits. If Onslaught is defending, then dodging backward removes one Neuroshock, but only if you're not metal, which is definitely a problem for a large chunk of the tech class. This effect only happens once every 2.5 seconds, but if you are landing a bunch of hits against Onslaught, you're going to want to be very cognizant of this cooldown and dashing back whenever you can to mitigate those Neuroshocks, because remember, they may not be ticking away for a whole lot at first, but between Daunted and pieces later in the kit, you don't want them to live on you. And then while Onslaught is suffering from Shock, Incinerate, Plasma, or Cold Snap, inflict a Neuroshock on the opponent every second. So avoid those dots. They're very bad. Very similar to Bishop in that way. On his heavy attack, the first hit pauses all personal damaging effects, both debuffs and passives, for 1.5 seconds. And if the opponent is not stunned by specifically a stun debuff, then you get a free Daunted debuff and the pause lasts for 10 seconds instead. This is why when fighting against Purifiers or against debuff immune characters, Onslaught just pops off, because you can just parry heavy and have all of the pause uptime in the world. Brings the skill ceiling way, way, way down, and then you can just hold on to all of your Neuroshocks forever. When we get there, you can hold on to all of your degens. Really takes the damage ceiling up. Now, of course, if you are facing someone who does not purify the stun debuff, because that is why that works, right? Because even if it's a stun passive, it's no longer a stun debuff. If you're not facing someone who triggers that clause in the effect, well, then you're probably going to have to heavy counter heavies and specials. That is, of course, possible, but requires a bit more finesse and probably a bit more block damage. Although Onslaught also blocks pretty well, so you are helped out there as well. Moving on to our special attacks. The special one, Shrapnel. The first line of this special is a little bit difficult to parse based on precedent, but let me walk you through it. Each hit has a 100% chance, plus a flat 50% chance to inflict a personal Neuroshock passive, and an organic magnetism debuff for 16 seconds. We'll talk about what those do in a minute, but let's just focus on the 100% chance plus a flat 50% chance. What this means is that the ability has a 100% chance that can be raised and lowered by most ability accuracy reduction. But then it also has that chance increased by a flat 50%. And flat ability accuracy increases happen separately from non-flat ability accuracy increases, meaning even if Onslaught were affected by multiple neurotoxins from Archangel, reducing the 100% chance to 0, there would still be a 50% chance for these things to happen. The only way to fully shut off this ability would be with flat ability accuracy reduction, which is generally something we don't do, honestly. So watch out for this very carefully. It's an incredibly dangerous ability and very difficult to avoid. This can trigger through block, and so now we want to talk about what the organic magnetism debuffs do. These reduce ability accuracy and combat power rate on the opponent. That 2.6% potency multiplied by the max stack of 8 is going to get you right around 20%. So 20% reduction to ability accuracy, worse than Domino, and 20% reduction to combat power rate if you get hit by or block this whole special. Highly recommend you work on this dex and try and make sure that doesn't happen, right? It's 3 dexes, a pause, and then another one. It's a very tricky dex, but it is possible to learn and get down 100%. Because one of these on you might sting, but it is definitely doable. Very difficult to win a fight if you block a full special one from Onslaught. While Organic Magnetism is active, this special also costs less power and is more likely to be activated. So once this happens once and you hit Onslaught, if you didn't dex it perfectly, it's probably going to keep coming. Another reason to really master this special evade. If the duration of an Organic Magnetism debuff is reduced by any means, it gets reinflicted as a passive. So for any characters that reduce non-damaging debuff duration or general debuff duration, like Craven or Blade, they're going to have a tough time with this because they're going to get rid of it real quick, but then it's going to come back as a passive for the full 16 seconds on top of that. So moving on to the Special 2. On activation, this inflicts a Delirium debuff of 30% potency. The potency for Delirium reduces combat power rate further, if you remember from Mr. Negative, so it allows Onslaught to do more damage while granting less power to the opponent. But the important part is that it reverses your controls, right? So once this attack has been activated, once Onslaught has spent that power, your controls are going to be reversed for the whole special. Be ready for it, bring a counter, or just try not to push into the Special 2. This one's tricky. This, of course, does not trigger when fighting an opponent with Psychic Shielding, so that does count as a counter. You do not need full reverse controls immunity here. The tag will do. And then when this attack actually hits, it replaces all Neuroshocks with Degeneration passives. These only last for 6 seconds, but they do a lot more damage than the Neuroshocks. And because these are damaging effects, they can be paused by the pause on the heavy attack. They will also be paused if applied while the pause from the heavy attack is active, to clarify. That does pause new effects while it's up. And so if you heavy cancel into the Special 2, as you've probably seen in videos by now, this Special 2 does a lot more damage because the degens start paused, and then that gives you time to pause them again with another heavy attack later. Very, very strong. And of course, on the very first hit of this special, this degen conversion can apply through block, which means that you can't just parry it to get around the reverse controls. You do have to actually dex it in the other direction. Now, for the Special 3, this inflicts a stun passive for 3 seconds. Very spooky on defense, also useful on offense because it's not a stun debuff, so you can run right in and pause things. This special also costs less power for each personal Neuroshock on the opponent, up to a maximum of 33% less, which is a full bar, meaning that you can come out of this special attack with a Special 1 ready. You can run up to your opponent, immediately heavy, and you could cancel into the Special 1 to keep building Neuroshocks, but since this special also inflicts 20 Neuroshock passives and refreshes all of them, maybe you just want to keep running from 1 bar of power all the way up to 2 and throw that Special 2 with all of these free Neuroshocks and therefore degens still active. Very strong longer fight loop there. And then the signature ability, Onslaught can block unblockable special attacks from skill champions. Full stop, doesn't need to do anything for it. As long as you're fighting a skill champ, you can block unblockable specials. Daunted potency is increased by 33%. That is a non-flat increase, so 15% Daunted goes up to 20% Daunted, giving you a maximum possible increase of damage during special attacks of 200% at full stacks. And then for each non-damaging debuff or personal non-damaging passive on the opponent, Onslaught special attacks gain extra block penetration. So looking back over the kit, non-damaging debuffs or passives is going to include Daunted, Crushed, Delirium, and your Organic Magnetisms, as well as any other non-damaging debuffs applied by a node. right? So this can very quickly get to pretty chunky levels of block penetration. Moving on to synergy bonuses, Onslaught is extremely selfish. All of these synergies only help him. But when defeating a mutant champion with Professor X or either Magneto on the team, Onslaught regens. Striking an opponent or their block while they are unstoppable consumes 3 Daunted effects to remove the unstoppable. You can do this every 20 seconds. Cable and Strife both turn this on, obviously an homage to Strife's ability to counter unstoppable by attacking his opponent. With Red Skull on the team, Onslaught regens incoming physical damage against skill champions. Extremely powerful ability, in addition to being a good Thorns counter. With Apocalypse on the team, Onslaught gets a crush charge offensively when his own combo meter passes 20, allowing you to take that part of his kit and make it not just a defender mechanic. Also, with Apocalypse on the team, Onslaught gets extra block proficiency. And then with Captain America, Spider-Man, Gambit, Hulk, or Wolverine, we have a generic synergy, extra crit rating. And that is Onslaught. He is extremely powerful, very strong defender, very good versatile damage on offense, powerful utility. You want him in your roster, bluntly. And if you don't have him in your roster, you probably want to ban him in Battlegrounds. And either way, you might end up needing to fight him in Alliance War because he is in the current tactic. So I highly recommend picking up at least the 3 or 4 star and starting to work on those special 1 dexes. He is tricky. It's not news at this point to talk about the best counters for him, which, if you're going direct ones in class, Shocker and Captain America Sam Wilson are the 2 most direct ones. Neither of them crit, neither of them are metal. That's the kind of thing you're looking for. Shocker can close out the fight very quickly. Captain America can reduce incoming effects like Daunted with his Bulwark. They're both very good at it, but one way or another, you're probably going to have to learn how to fight him. Of course, on the war map, there are a lot of ways of playing around him, but you really kind of need to understand the full kit to figure out what will and won't work with various non-ideal counters. So let me know what you think of this. Let me know if you're enjoying playing Onslaught, if you do have him, and let me know if you would like me to start working on a So You Have to Fight Onslaught video. It would probably be a bit before I can get that out, but I am willing to do that for newer defenders. Haven't done one of those since Photon, but let me know if you think that would help. And until next time, thanks so much for watching, and take care.